The shot cracked the night wide open, a single bullet meant to erase a man and every secret he carried. But before death could find him, something else did, a blur of fur, muscle, and loyalty thrown across the line of fire. The world froze in that heartbeat, the man bracing for an ending he believed he deserved, the dog defying it with everything he had left. They had called him a mistake, a broken tool, a failure fit to be forgotten, but in that moment, he became more than a soldier, more than a shadow. He became the shield. In a town drowning in betrayal, when the system itself sold its soul, the purest act of courage did not come from a man in a uniform or a judge behind a bench, but from a heart that never learned how to give up. The story is not about victory written in headlines. It's about sacrifice written in scars, loyalty written in blood, and two lives the world tried to throw away, choosing instead to save each other. If this story speaks to something inside you, stay a little longer. Like this video, subscribe for more, and share with us where you're watching from and which moment made you believe again. The morning sun spilled across the deserted highway like melted gold, casting long, lazy shadows from the withering trees lining both sides. Everything about the scene whispered peace, almost too much peace, the kind that made seasoned instincts twitch beneath the surface. A single figure cruised along the empty road, a man on a battered Harley, the engine's growl low and steady, as if it too were cautious of shattering the fragile silence. The rider's silhouette was lean and deliberate, his posture relaxed yet alert, the kind of posture that only came from years behind bars, learning to trust no one and nothing but the road under your wheels. His name was Cole Vance, 42 years old, 6 years served for a crime he claimed he never committed. Today he wore freedom like an ill-fitting jacket, awkward, heavy, but better than chains. Strapped to the back of his seat was a canvas duffel, battered and bulging. Passers-by might have guessed it carried a change of clothes, maybe a few battered keepsakes, but the weight of it was wrong, too heavy, too silent. And in Cole's eyes, deep, stormy gray, there wasn't the chaotic fear of a man smuggling contraband. No, there was something stranger. Peace, as if he were carrying not a burden but a silent promise. At a crossroads town called Ash Hollow, he slowed down. A single gas station, a diner with a blinking "open" sign, and a roadside sheriff's station marked the entire existence of the place. The world seemed to hold its breath. At that exact moment, at the dusty entrance to the sheriff's station, a German shepherd named Shadow lay in the shade, head resting between scarred paws. Shadow was no ordinary canine. Just 6 months ago, during a drug raid gone wrong, he had taken a bullet meant for his handler, Deputy Sarah Holt. The vet said he'd never fully regain his old self, but today, something in the thick summer air stirred him from his slumber. His ears pricked, his body tensed. Then, without warning, he rose stiff-legged, rigid as Cole's motorcycle rumbled into view. Shadow's handler, Officer Holt, leaned against the doorway, sipping her coffee, her eyes narrowing as she noticed her partner's reaction. In all the time since his injury, Shadow had barely shown any emotion until now. The German shepherd's hackles lifted. A low, guttural growl vibrated through his chest. His muscles coiled like a spring held barely in check. "Shadow, heel," Holt commanded automatically, but the dog didn't budge. His nose quivered, his eyes locked onto Cole with laser precision. Cole, oblivious to the silent commotion he was causing, rolled past with an air of weary patience, pulled into the gas station across the street, and killed the engine. He swung one booted foot over the seat, landing with a soft thud, and reached for the duffel with a practiced, almost reverent grip. Shadow lunged forward against his leash. Holt had to dig her heels in to stop him. Coffee sloshed out of her cup, forgotten as the leash cut into her palm. She cursed under her breath, heart thudding. She hadn't seen Shadow react like this, even to the dealers they'd apprehended last spring. What the hell was going on? Across the street, Cole glanced once, casually, towards the sheriff's station, his gaze lingering a half-second longer than necessary on the building, the dog, the woman trying to restrain it. Then he turned back, slipping a crumpled bill into the rusty gas pump. If he noticed the attention he was drawing, he gave no sign. But deep inside, a gear shifted. The plan, long rehearsed in prison yards and lonely nights, had begun ticking into motion. Shadow whined, a sound that didn't match his usual stoic demeanor. His tail was stiff, his body trembling with an urgency Holt couldn't interpret. "Not yet," She finally managed to wrestle him back, forcing him to sit, though he sat like a loaded weapon, ears pinned, eyes unblinking, muscles locked. "Jesus boy, what the hell's gotten into you?" she muttered. She followed his stare across to the biker. Her hand instinctively brushed the holster at her hip. Meanwhile, Cole filled the tank with slow, deliberate movements, every second stretching taut as a wire about to snap. A little girl in a pink sundress darted out from the diner, laughing, clutching an ice cream cone. Cole's gaze softened. For a fleeting moment, something almost tender crossed his face. Shadow, however, growled low and deep again. The sheriff's deputy inside the station, an aging man named Price, stepped out, shading his eyes against the sun. "Bolt," he called. "What's the damn dog barking at now?" Holt didn't answer immediately. Her instincts were too busy screaming. Something was wrong. The dog's reaction was too visceral, too primal. And if Shadow smelled something, she trusted him more than her own damn senses. "Better keep an eye on that biker," she said under her breath. Price chuckled, dismissive. "Another drifter. Ash Hollow's seen 100 of them." But Holt didn't move. Neither did Shadow, rooted like a living sentinel. Across the street, Cole finished fueling up, slinging the duffel over one broad shoulder. He paused, the weight settling unevenly against his frame. Then, almost reluctantly, he mounted his bike again. As the engine roared back to life, Shadow let out one final, sharp bark, a sound so piercing it shattered. Holt's hand hovered near her belt radio. Across the street, Cole met her gaze for a fraction of a second, a flash of acknowledgement. Then he kicked the Harley into gear and with a muted growl of tires on gravel, rolled out of Ash Hollow, leaving dust and questions swirling behind him. "Pipes out of good biker. It's just a biker. You don't make mistakes, do you, boy?" she whispered. Shadow didn't answer. He didn't need to. Sarah Holt didn't sleep much that night, even after the sun dipped below the jagged horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and fading gold. Her mind spun like a wheel stuck in deep mud. She sat at her kitchen table, a lukewarm beer sweating into a coaster, staring at the grain of the wood as if it held answers. Shadow lay curled at her feet, but every so often his body would jerk in restless sleep, a soft whimper escaping his muzzle. He was dreaming, she knew, reliving something his mind couldn't let go. Maybe, she thought bitterly, they weren't that different after all. It had been almost a year since the bust had gone sideways, since the bullet meant for her had found Shadow instead. A year since she'd frozen in the field, panic locking her limbs while her partner bled out beside her. She had saved him, barely. The department had decorated her with a medal she couldn't even look at. The whispers behind closed doors had been worse. "She's lost her edge." She froze up. "She's not fit for duty anymore." Shadow hadn't judged her. Shadow had just healed, slowly, painfully, trusting her even when she couldn't trust herself. Tonight, though, Shadow's reaction to the biker gnawed at her like a splinter under the skin. Cole Vance hadn't done anything overtly suspicious. No sudden moves, no threats. Just a slow, calculated calm that had felt too. Shadow rose immediately, alert despite his limp. Together they slid into her aging patrol SUV and rolled into the night. Ash Hollow at night was a ghost town. The neon of the diner buzzed feebly. The gas station was locked up tight, only the motionless pumps standing guard like sentinels. Holt parked across the street from the gas station, letting the engine idle low. She watched, waited. Nothing moved, no Harley, no drifter. She drummed her fingers against the steering wheel, frustration simmering under her skin. Then, impulsively, she killed the lights and stepped out. Shadow followed at her heel, silent and sharp. Crossing the cracked asphalt to the gas station felt like stepping into a forgotten battlefield. The faint stink of diesel and sun-baked rubber hung in the air. Holt crouched near the spot where Cole had fueled up. She wasn't even sure what she was looking for. Maybe a sign. Maybe just peace of mind. Shadow moved ahead of her, his nose working furiously, weaving back and forth like a bloodhound on a scent trail. His body stiffened near one of the pumps. Holt froze. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Shadow growled low, a sound that made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. He pawed at the cracked concrete, whining deep in his throat. Holt knelt beside him, trying to see what had triggered him. At first, the oily grime of 100 gas station spills. But then, as she leaned closer, The faintest trace of something sharp and metallic cut through the heavy. A scent memory flooded her. The sterile tang of uncut narcotics. The same odor that had clung to the back rooms of busted meth labs and cartel safe houses. No civilian would have recognized it. But a canine, especially one like Shadow, trained in years of deep ops, would never forget. Shadow sat back on his haunches, staring at her, tail stiff against the ground, waiting for her to understand. She rose slowly, heart pounding harder now. Cole Vance's duffel hadn't been carrying clothes or gear for a new start. It had carried something else. Something dangerous. 100 possibilities zipped through her brain. Drugs. Weapons. Thumping worse. Human cargo. The logical part of her screamed to call it in. Protocol. Backup. Chain of command. But the instinct honed over years in the field, the same instinct she'd thought she'd lost, told her no. Not yet. She had seen the biker's eyes, calm, sure. But there had been something buried deep there too. Fear? No, not quite. Something more like resignation. Like a man on the verge of completing something terrible and necessary. The night was thick and heavy around her, pressing down. She glanced at Shadow, saw the unspoken trust burning in his gaze, and made a decision. They would find him, alone if they had to. Sliding back into the SUV, Holt ran her hand over the dog's scarred fur, a silent oath passing between them. The roads around Ash Hollow spiderwebbed out into nowhere. Abandoned warehouses, old freight depots, forgotten farmhouses crumbling into dust. If Cole was hiding something, it would be somewhere no one looked anymore. She punched the gas, headlights slicing through the dark, Shadow standing braced against the seat beside her. The scent, she thought grimly, would be fading fast. Every second counted. A thin thread of hope twisted inside her. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe it was just an old duffel soaked in something left over from his prison days. But she didn't believe it. Not after seeing the way Shadow had reacted. Not after feeling the wrongness that had coiled like smoke in her gut when she looked at that biker. Ash Hollow's town limits blurred past. The empty fields stretched out like a black ocean. Somewhere out there, a Harley's tire tracks faded into dust. Somewhere out there, Cole Vance rode towards whatever unfinished business still chained him to the past. And they were right behind him. The night swallowed the SUV whole. Only the twin beams of headlights carving a narrow path through the darkness. Ahead, the road forked. Shadow's ears twitched. Holt tightened her grip on the wheel, heart hammering. She didn't see the broken fence until she was almost on it. The sharp, splintered wood jagging out at odd angles where someone, maybe something heavy, had plowed through. Tires skidded. Dust clouded up. Holt yanked the wheel, adrenaline screaming through her veins. Shadow braced himself, snarling low. The duffel scent was stronger now, unmistakable even through the closed windows. Shadow whined, pawing at the door. He wanted out. He wanted to run. Cole Vance was close, very close, and so was whatever nightmare he was dragging behind him. The night swallowed the SUV as it sped down the fractured road, every pothole rattling the old vehicle's frame like warning shots. Holt gripped the wheel tighter, eyes locked on the narrow beam of headlights carving through the darkness. Shadow stood braced beside him, muscles taut, nose twitching furiously as he tracked the invisible trail left behind. The broken fence they passed wasn't just coincidence. Cole Vance had come this way. Somewhere beyond the scraggly tree line, Holt caught a glimmer of taillights weaving between the ruins of abandoned farmhouses. She hit the accelerator. The SUV roared forward, gravel and dust kicking up in furious clouds behind them. It didn't take long. They found the Harley parked under the skeleton of an old tractor shed, the moonlight silvering the cracked bones of wood and rusted metal. Cole Vance stood next to the bike, smoking a cigarette with the nonchalance of a man waiting for an appointment he couldn't miss. The battered duffel bag slung over one shoulder hung low and heavy. He didn't flinch when Holt pulled up, the SUV's headlights pinning him like a moth under glass. Shadow growled low beside her, his hackles raised so high they formed a ridge down his spine. Holt killed the engine but left the lights on. She stepped out carefully, hand near her weapon but not drawing yet. "Evening," Cole called, his voice dry and cracked like old leather. "Something I can help you with, deputy?" Holt kept her tone even, betraying none of the electricity crackling up her spine. "Mind if we ask a few questions, routine?" Cole explains. His expression didn't change, but something in his stance coiled tighter, almost imperceptibly. "Sure," he said, voice dripping with the kind of false calm that made Holt's stomach knot. She approached slowly, Shadow glued to her side, growling in his throat. The duffel bag, now that she was closer, reeked of chemical rot, faint but unmistakable. She gestured at it. "What's in the bag?" Cole smiled, then a small tired thing that didn't reach his eyes. Without a word, he swung the bag off his shoulder and, with a sudden, violent motion, hurled it high and wide into the darkness. Holt's hand flew instinctively to her gun. Shadow barked, tense, ready to spring. The bag hit the ground with a dull thud 20 feet away, raising a puff of dust. Cole took a casual step back, palms half raised in a show of surrender that fooled no one. "Nothing you need to worry about," he said, voice almost a whisper against the pressing night air. Holt's instincts screamed at her this was a distraction, but what was the real play? "Shadow, search," she barked, pointing after the bag. But Shadow didn't move towards it. Instead, without hesitation, he lunged for the Harley. Holt's breath caught as she watched the dog bolt past her, beeline straight for the motorcycle like a missile locked onto a target. Cole's smirk faltered. Shadow's body collided with the bike, almost knocking it sideways. He sniffed furiously, barking in deep, desperate bursts, circling the vehicle with a frenzy that made Holt's blood run cold. He pawed at the leather seat, nose driving into the seams near the yoke, barking louder and sharper. Holt sprinted forward, weapon drawn now. Cole didn't run. He simply stood there, smoke curling from the forgotten cigarette in his fingers, his face as still as a statue. Holt's voice was sharp as a whip crack. "Hands where I can see them." Cole obliged, fingers splayed, shoulders loose but his eyes burning with something raw and unspoken. Holt jerked her chin at the bike. "What's in it?" she demanded. Cole said nothing. Shadow growled, digging frantically at the saddle stitching. Something inside there was setting him off like a fire alarm. Heart pounding, Holt stepped cautiously towards the bike. With her free hand, she yanked at the edge of the worn leather seat. It resisted for a moment, then tore free with a loud rip. Something clattered out onto the dusty ground. A small, tightly wrapped pack, black plastic, smelling faintly of gasoline and something far more acrid. Holt didn't need to open it to guess. Drugs. High grade, compressed tight to avoid detection. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't some ex-con trying to rebuild a life. This was something much, much deeper. Shadow barked again, paws battering at another part of the bike, his body vibrating with urgency. Holt swore under her breath. There was more. Hidden compartments maybe, or something worse. She turned the gun fully onto Cole. "You want to start talking, or do I have to tear this thing apart inch by inch?" Cole smiled again, but now it was hollow, resigned. "You don't want to do that, deputy," he said softly. "Why not?" Holt hissed. "Because you're not just chasing a mule," he said. "You're stepping into a blood feud you don't understand." The night seemed to grow colder around them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped, a lonely sound slicing through the heavy air. Shadow let out a low, mournful whine, circling the bike again. Nose pressed together. Holt's gaze flickered. The gas tank. The smell was stronger there. Not just narcotics. Something sharper. More metallic. Explosives? Her pulse thundered in her ears. Cole watched her with that same dead gaze, as if he already knew how this night would end. And not just for him. The night air tightened around them like a noose, every breath thick with tension as Holt circled the Harley, gun steady in her hands, mind racing ahead. Shadow's barks came sharper now, laser-focused on the gas tank, paws scraping against the cracked metal as if the secrets buried within were clawing to escape. Holt crouched cautiously beside the bike, her heart thudding against her ribs like a trapped animal. Her gloved hands searched the frame with practiced precision, fingertips skimming the dust-caked surfaces until they found it. A seam that didn't belong. A panel cut so fine into the gas tank it could barely be seen without knowing exactly where to look. With a sharp tug, the panel gave way, revealing a hidden compartment wedged into the hollow of the tank. Holt's stomach twisted as she reached inside and pulled out a tightly bound black duffel, smaller than the one Cole had thrown but heavier somehow, its contents shifting with a muted thud that made her skin crawl. Shadow whined deep in his chest, vibrating with pent-up urgency. She set the bag on the ground, weapons still trained loosely on Cole, who watched with a hollow sort of detachment, like a man already 2 steps ahead in a game no one else realized they were playing. Holt unzipped the duffel slowly, half expecting a blast of narcotic powder or worse, but what spilled out under the harsh beam of her flashlight made her freeze. Bundles of white powder wrapped meticulously in thick plastic filled the bottom of the bag, the bitter chemical stench unmistakable even through the layers. But that wasn't what rooted Holt to the spot. Nestled between the bricks of narcotics, wrapped in oil-stained canvas, was a flat, rectangular object, a metal box roughly the size of a small laptop, battered and scored with old scratches. Carefully, Holt pried it open, her gloved fingers working quickly. Inside, she found something she hadn't seen since her days working special investigations. A hand-fitted letter, ink faded but unmistakably fresh, with a pattern of dots, slashes, and spirals forming lines across the page. Cipher code. Old school. Military grade. Her throat dried instantly. Only people who had something catastrophic to hide used dead-drop-coded messages like this. A shadow pressed against her leg, low growls reverberating through his chest as if sensing the shift in gravity, the way the earth itself seemed to tilt. Across from her, Cole didn't run. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he slowly raised his hands higher, palms open to the night sky, his cigarette dropping forgotten into the dust. The surrender wasn't desperate, it wasn't panicked, it was deliberate, calculated. His face, illuminated by the SUV's headlights, was carved from shadow and defiance. Yet behind the cold steel of his gaze, Holt caught something else flickering. Not fear, not guilt, but something almost hopeful. Her instincts screamed at her to call for backup, to get on the radio, to throw him in cuffs and sort out the rest later. But years of working the underbelly of human nature had taught her something more dangerous than blind obedience. To listen to the things no one said. She rose to her feet, the ciphered letter clutched in one hand, still trained on Cole. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut the thick air. Cole's lips twitched at the corners, the ghost of a smile, but no mockery in it this time. Only a grim acknowledgement, like 2 soldiers recognizing each other across enemy lines. "It's your way out," he said, his voice low and cracked from disuse but heavy with meaning. "Or your funeral." Holt stiffened, the words hitting harder than any threat he'd pulled so far. Shadow growled again, pressing against her thigh like a breathing warning sign. "You don't know what you're carrying, do you?" Cole added, tilting his head slightly, like a man contemplating the gallows. "You think this is just about dope?" Holt said nothing, her grip tightening slightly on her weapon. "You think I'm stupid enough to ride into a dead town, pack a bag with blow, and hope some washed-up deputy with a busted canine nails me first try?" he said, almost laughing now but without any real humor. "Do you think any of this is by accident?" Holt's mind raced, piecing together fragments she hadn't even realized she was collecting. The heavy duffel, the throwaway move, the deliberate surrender, and now the code. Cole wasn't a mule, he wasn't even a dealer. He was a messenger. But for whom? And why here in Ash Hollow, a town forgotten even by the maps that charted it? She stepped forward cautiously, shadow matching her movement in perfect sync, their training knitting them together tighter than the silence stretching between her and Cole. "You're going to tell me everything," Holt said, voice low and steady, "or I swear I'll bury you so deep no one will find your bones." Cole chuckled dryly, shaking his head slightly. "It's not me you need to worry about," he said, his voice dipping into something colder, older. "It's who comes next." He nodded toward the duffel Holt had tossed aside earlier, the one still lying untouched where it had landed in the dirt. "That was never the threat," he said. A cold shiver slid down Holt's spine. Shadow barked sharply once, muscles coiling as if sensing something or someone approaching unseen. Out beyond the broken fence, past the fields choked with weeds and rusting wire, lights flickered. 1, 2, 3, moving closer, too fast for comfort. Cole lowered his hands slightly, not in defiance but in weary anticipation. "It's too late to run," he said almost gently. "It's already started." The night pressed heavier around them, thick with dust and fear as the approaching lights flickered closer, headlights bouncing off the twisted fence lines and broken concrete. Holt's heart hammered as she jammed the coded letter into her vest, gun never wavering from Cole's chest. "Move," she snapped, her voice a sharp whip through the darkness. Without protest, Cole raised his hands higher and allowed her to shove him toward the SUV, Shadow circling protectively at her side, his eyes never leaving the dirt road where the new threat approached. Holt didn't have time to call it in, didn't have time to think. Instincts ruled now, the old training kicking in despite the static of doubt clawing at the back of her mind. They piled into the vehicle, Holt jamming the gear into reverse, tires screeching as she threw the SUV backward into the ditch before swinging the wheel hard and fishtailing onto the main road. Dust clouded behind them, masking their retreat for precious seconds. In the rearview mirror, Holt caught glimpses of the newcomers, 3 SUVs, dark and unmarked, sliding like sharks through the broken night, gain on them with terrifying speed. Beside her, Cole sat still, hands loosely cuffed, his body relaxed in a way that made her skin crawl. He wasn't scared. He was resigned. "They weren't supposed to find me this fast," he muttered under his breath. Holt didn't answer, teeth clenched against the rising panic. Shadow braced himself in the back seat, growling low and deep. At a break in the road, Holt jerked the wheel and skidded behind the rotting shell of an old grain silo, killing the lights. Breathless, they sat in silence as the dark SUVs tore past, their headlights stabbing into the distance without slowing. For a moment, Holt allowed herself a shallow breath of relief, but it didn't last. She turned sharply to Cole, the thin strip of moonlight slicing across his battered face. "Start talking now." Cole smiled grimly, a dead man's smile. "You want the short version or the one that'll make you puke?" "Short," Holt snapped. Cole nodded slowly. 5 years ago, I wasn't a biker. I was a cop." The world tilted. Holt stared at him, struggling to process the words. Cole continued, voice flat, emotionless. "Undercover narcotics task force. Deep cover. Too deep, maybe. They planted me inside a cartel cell operating out of Phoenix. I built their trust, fed information back to my handlers. We were supposed to make a move, take them down hard." His eyes hardened, old anger flickering beneath the words. Only when the day came, Holt gripped the steering wheel tighter, the pieces beginning to slide into place. "They left you there." Cole let out a harsh laugh, no humor in it. "Worse, they framed me. Feds rolled in an hour later, found me with enough dope to bury me under the prison forever. My own team testified against me, said I'd flipped." Holt felt her stomach knot, a slow, sickening twist. She'd heard rumors before, whispers about ops going south, about handlers burning assets when the heat got too strong. She never wanted to believe them. Now here was the proof, breathing beside her. Cole shifted slightly in the seat, wincing at the pressure on his cuffed wrists. "Spent 4 years inside, got out on a technicality nobody bothered to fight. Came back to find my name stripped from every record. My life erased like it never mattered." Shadow whined from the back seat, sensing the rising tension. Holt swallowed hard, trying to focus. "The drugs on your bike are real," Cole cut her off, voice cold. "But not mine. They're leverage, payment, proof. A breadcrumb for someone higher up to follow." Holt's mind raced ahead, seeing where this dark road led. "And the letter?" Cole's smile, "For insurance policies for men who don't plan on growing old." Outside the vehicle, the world remained deceptively still. Inside, the path bled out between them. Then Holt asked the question, clawing at her gut. "Why here? Why Ash Hollow?" Cole's gaze flickered briefly toward the rearview mirror where Shadow watched him, tense and wary. "Because of him," Cole said softly. Holt frozen. Shadow cocked his head, sensing the shift but not understanding. Holt's voice came rough and raw. "Explain." Cole turned to face her fully now, the scarred lines around his mouth deepening with grim memory. "Shadow wasn't supposed to be yours," he said. "He was mine." The words hit like a body blow. "During my op, they assigned me a K9, Cole continued. "They said they would help sell the cover story. Shadow was a green pup back then, sharp, smarter than the bastards who trained him. He saved my ass more times than I can count, until the night everything went wrong." He paused, jaw tightening. "They shot him," Cole said finally, voice cracking for the first time. "Tailored him after himself fiercely in the name of the government." Holt struggled to breathe, the pieces slamming together with brutal force. Shadow, broken but resilient. Cole, erased and betrayed. 2 survivors of a war nobody ever acknowledged. That's why he reacted to me, Cole said. Softer now? Almost a whisper. Shadow pressed against the seat, a low whimper vibrating in his throat. His eyes locked on Cole with a confused, painful recognition. Holt's hands trembled slightly on the wheel. Nothing in her training had prepared her for this. Before she could speak, a flash of light illuminated the sky behind them, headlights. Dozens of them, bearing down from the hills like a flood. Cole shifted in his seat, posture tightening. It's too late, he said again, and this time there was no bravado in it, only certainty. They're here. The headlights multiplied behind them, cutting the night into jagged slices as the convoy of unmarked SUVs barreled down the old county road, closing the distance with alarming speed. Holt gritted her teeth, jamming the accelerator to the floor, but the SUV's aging engine whined in protest. In the passenger seat, Cole stayed unnervingly calm, his cuffed hands resting loosely on his thighs, his expression one of grim inevitability. Shadow growled low in the back seat, the fur along his spine bristling as if he could already feel the predators closing in. Holt knew they couldn't outrun them. They needed an angle, something those bastards hadn't anticipated. She jerked the wheel, cutting across an abandoned service road, tires kicking up plumes of dust that hung in the headlights like specters. The SUVs behind them split apart, some following, others fanning out like hunting dogs scenting blood. Holt cursed under her breath. Cole shifted slightly, grimacing as the cuffs bit into his wrists. You can't outrun them, he said, not mocking, just, you have to think bigger. Holt shot him a glare sharp enough to cut steel. You got a better idea, genius? Cole smiled thinly. Yeah, ditch the bike. Holt's mind raced. Of course the Harley still parked under the silo, packed with evidence, with whatever dirty secret was stitched into its gas tank and seat seams. It wasn't just about Cole anymore. That bike was a magnet pulling their enemies straight to them. You'll think the evidence is with the bike, Cole said quickly, urgency creeping into his voice. If we ditch it, they'll waste time chasing a ghost. Holt made a snap decision. She slammed the brakes, throwing the SUV into a brutal U-turn that sent Shadow skidding across the back seat with a yelp. She roared back down the way they'd come, heart pounding so hard it blurred her vision. Within minutes, the skeletal frame of the tractor shed loomed out of the night. Holt skidded the SUV to a halt, throwing the door open as she sprinted toward the Harley. She yanked it upright, cursing under her breath, and shoved it toward the road, wedging a rock against the throttle. Shadow bounded out after her, pacing anxiously as Holt kicked the bike into gear. The Harley roared into motion, wobbling down the road unmanned, a mechanical decoy bleeding noise and dust. In the rearview mirror, Holt watched with grim satisfaction as two of the SUVs peeled off, giving chase to the phantom bike. It wouldn't buy them much time, but it would have to be enough. Back in the SUV, breathing hard, she turned to Cole. Now you talk. That Harley yours? Cole shook his head slowly, the lines of exhaustion deepening in his face. It's a plant, given to me 2 days ago. Keys dropped by a contact I never saw. Instructions clear. Ride it into Ash Hollow, stay visible, wait. Holt's stomach churned. Wait for what? Cole's eyes darkened. For someone else to make their move? She ground her teeth, feeling the trap tightening around them. The drugs, the coded letter, the hidden compartments. You're telling me none of it was yours? Fine, Cole said quietly. I'm just the bait. The words hung between them like the smell of blood and water. Holt forced herself to think, to analyze, to be the cop she was trained to be instead of the animal the fear wanted her to become. GPS, she muttered suddenly, the thoughts slamming into her like a truck. She spun back toward the SUV's onboard system. If the bike wasn't yours, whoever gave it to you could track it. Hell, maybe even more than that. She yanked out the old laptop she kept under the seat, a relic from better days when technology was a tool and not a leash. Tapping furiously, she accessed the SUV's wireless scanner, hoping to pick up any open signals. There, a faint ping, buried under layers of encrypted chatter. The bike had a tracker embedded deep in its frame. But the signal didn't just end there, it pulsed, alive, active, leading somewhere else. Shadow barked sharply, tail stiff. Holt zoomed in on the crude satellite map, her eyes narrowing. The signal wasn't heading toward the highway. It was veering northeast, straight toward a dark, dead zone outside the town limits. The old warehouse district. No businesses, no traffic, no lights. Just miles of crumbling concrete shells and hollowed-out memories. Cole leaned over, studying the screen, his breath hitched, the first true crack in his composed armor. "They're consolidating," he said, voice low and raw, bringing everything to one spot. Final handoff. Holt didn't ask how he knew. Deep down, she already understood. This wasn't just a drug run. It was an execution, and they were driving straight into the jaws of it. She revved the engine, tires spitting gravel as they peeled away from the grain silo, the SUV vibrating with pent-up fury. Shadow braced himself, ears pinned back, his nose twitching furiously against the dashboard vents. The warehouse grew larger on the horizon, a black smudge against the deep blue wash of the night sky. Around them, the desert exhaled its dry, ancient breath, carrying with it the smell of rust, dust, and something newer, something dangerous. In the passenger seat, Cole sat very still, his shoulders tense, his cuffed hands flexing unconsciously. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked quietly, the question more for her than himself. Holt's jaw tightened. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The warehouse loomed closer, a yawning mouth waiting to swallow them whole. Lights flickered at its base. Movement. Too much movement. Far too late to turn back. The SUV slid to a halt under the crumbling shadow of the warehouse, its battered frame rattling with the effort. Holt killed the engine, plunging them into a silence so heavy it seemed to smother even the restless desert wind. Cole stiffened in the seat beside her, his eyes flickering to the shattered windows and rusted sheet metal that barely clung to the warehouse's skeletal frame. Shadow whined softly from the back, his body tense and low to the seat, every muscle vibrating with anticipation. Holt slid her hand to her sidearm, the familiar weight grounding her, and glanced sidewise at Cole. "You first," she said curtly. Cole offered a grim nod, the cuffs on his wrists clinking faintly as he pushed the door open. They moved together, silent and wary, slipping through the waist-high weeds that clawed at their legs. The warehouse loomed larger as they approached, the broken double doors yawning open like a mouth mid-scream. From the darkness inside came no movement, no voices, nothing but the faint echo of their own cautious footsteps. Holt's breath was tight in her chest as they crossed the threshold. The air inside was stale and thick with the smell of rust, old oil, and something more subtle, something that set her nerves on edge. She swept her flashlight in a wide arc across the cavernous interior. Broken crates littered the concrete floor. A few rusted forklifts sat abandoned like skeletal beasts in the gloom. But no guards, no drugs, no trap they could see. Shadow moved first, his nose working furiously, tail stiff, body rigid as he pulled ahead into the dark. Holt followed, heart hammering against her ribs. Cole stayed close behind, his posture loose but his eyes razor-sharp, scanning every shadow. They moved deeper, the flashlight's beams slicing across old machinery and rotted tarps. But still no sign of a shipment or an ambush. Holt's instincts screamed that they were missing something critical. Then Shadow barked a sharp single note and bolted to the far side of the warehouse, where a set of steel stairs led up to a catwalk clinging precariously to the wall. Holt swore under her breath and raced after him, boots pounding the cracked concrete. Cole hesitated only a second before following. At the top of the stairs, Holt swung the beam of her light across the wall and froze. Pinned across the far side of the warehouse, in neat, methodical rows, was a gallery of photographs. Hundreds of them, each one meticulously labeled, dated, organized. Not pictures of narcotics or gang members, not targets for a drug bust, but photographs of police officers, detectives, detectives, federal agents, and not just random snapshots, surveillance photos, men and women walking into dark alleys, exchanging envelopes in dimly lit parking garages, stepping out of unmarked sedans with faces grim and careful, faces Holt recognizing. Her stomach lurched violently, the entire task force, some of the department brass, and then her gaze caught on a particular cluster of photos framed almost reverently. The commander of the K-9 division, her former superior, the man who had pinned a commendation on her chest with one hand while stabbing her career in the back with the other. Commander Blake Sutton. There he was, caught in grainy black and white stills, meeting with unknown figures, trading envelopes for whispered promises. slipping into buildings he had no official reason to enter. Cold sweat prickled Holt's scalp. This wasn't just about Cole. This wasn't even about drugs. This was a purge. An entire network of corruption cataloged, photographed, prepared for exposure or destruction. Beside her, Cole exhaled slowly, his shoulders slumping under the weight of the moment. "You see it now," he said quietly. "This isn't about me. Never was." Holt didn't answer. Her mind spun, racing to connect the dots even as her gut twisted with betrayal. She thought back to the night Shadow had been wounded, the operation that had gone sideways, the sudden withdrawal of backup, the whispers that followed. It had never been about failure. It had been about cleaning the house. Anyone who got too close, who asked too many questions, who threatened the careful machinery behind the scenes, was removed, silenced, buried. And now she was standing inside the beating heart of it. Shadow barked again, drawing her attention to a smaller board adjacent to the photo wall. Documents. Financial records. Bank accounts, offshore transfers. The names matched the faces, money flowed like blood between the men and women sworn to uphold the law. And at the center of it all, Commander Sutton's name gleamed like a spider at the heart of a web. Holt's mouth went dry. Cole turned to face her fully, his voice low but firm. "They're not coming to kill." Below them, the warehouse remained still, but the sense of encroaching doom thickened with every heartbeat. Headlights flared suddenly outside, harsh and blinding against the cracked windows. Engines growled low and menacing, dozens of them. Shadow snarled, pacing the narrow walkway, body tense and ready. Holt drew her weapon without conscious thought, her other hand curling into a fist so tight her knuckles cracked. They didn't have much time, and now they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the truth itself. The engines rumbled outside the warehouse like a gathering storm, headlights slicing through the broken windows, bouncing off the jagged concrete floor where Holt and Cole stood frozen under the weight of the truth. Shadow growled low, pacing back and forth along the catwalk, the tension in the air thick enough to choke on. Holt's gun was slick in her palm, her heart hammering against her ribs with the fierce urgency of survival. But for the first time tonight, the terror wasn't just for herself. It was for everything she thought she knew, for the illusion of order she had spent her life serving. Cole's voice broke the stifling silence, low and grim. "They're not here to arrest us," he said. "They're here to erase every piece of this." His cuffed hands twitched slightly, the faint clink of metal on metal punctuating the heavy air. Holt swallowed hard, her mind racing. "You knew," she said hoarsely, struggling to wrap her head around the enormity of it. Cole nodded slowly. "Not enough to know Sutton isn't just a dirty cop." He turned his head, meeting her gaze squarely. "He's the kingpin." The words landed like a physical blow. Commander Sutton, decorated veteran, public hero, the face of law and order in Ash Hollow and beyond. Holt flashed back to the commendations. The newspaper articles, the speeches about integrity and duty. A lie. All of it. Cole continued, his voice like gravel scraping steel. The whole task force was a front. They recruited officers under the guise of targeting cartels. Deep ops, long-term infiltration. But Sutton, he used it to build his empire. Used us to eliminate rivals, consolidate roots. The moment we got too close to the real operations, Shadow whined softly, pressing against Holt's leg, sensing the rising dread that coiled through the air like smoke. The beam of Holt's flashlight flicked back across the photo wall, the grim parade of faces, the silent testimonies of lives bought, sold, discarded. Every target, every failed mission, every officer lost in the line of duty had been orchestrated. Cole leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The bike wasn't just a trap for me. It was bait for you too." Holt stiffened. "Me?" "You were the insurance," Cole said. "Sutton knew you had doubts, knew you never bought the official story after your canine operation blew up. He needed you out of the way, needed you to either die chasing ghosts or get buried in this mess if you got too close." Holt felt bile rise in her throat. She thought she had been fighting for justice, though she had been clawing her way back toward redemption. In reality, she had been a pawn on a board she never even saw. Cole took a slow, steady breath. "But if you're hearing this now, it means we have a shot." "A shot at what?" Holt rasped. Cole's lips curled into a humorous smile. "At cutting off the head of the snake. The plan unfurled between them in a grim, desperate instant. They had evidence. The photos, the financials, the coded letter hidden inside Holt's vest. But none of it would matter if they didn't make it out alive. Outside, the engines revved louder. Doors slammed. Heavy boots crunched gravel. They were surrounding the warehouse. Cole tilted his head toward the far end of the catwalk where a maintenance door hung half off its hinges. "There's a service tunnel out back," he said. "It'll get us into the storm drains. From there..." "Then what?" Holt demanded. Cole's eyes glinted darkly. "Then we go public, broadcast everything. Dump the files where everyone can see them. Burn Sutton's empire to the ground before he even knows what hit him." It was suicide. A 1 in a million chance at best. And yet Holt found herself nodding, her grip tightening around her weapon. For Shadow. For the partners she'd buried. For the oath she'd once believed in. "We move on my count," she hissed. Shadow barked once, sharp and fierce. They darted down the catwalk, boots clanging against rusted metal, the light from Holt's flashlight bobbing wildly. Behind them, the warehouse doors crashed open. A dozen armed men flooding inside, their weapons sweeping the cavernous space with mechanical precision. Gunshots split the air, bullets sparking off steel beams, punching through tarps and old equipment. Holt shoved Cole ahead of her, returning fire in controlled bursts, aiming to slow the advance rather than win a firefight they couldn't hope to survive. Shadow zigzagged ahead, leading the way toward the maintenance door, his powerful body a blur of motion. They hit the doorway, bursting into the narrow service tunnel, the air immediately thick with mildew and old oil. Holt slammed the door shut behind them, wedging a broken pipe through the handle as a makeshift lock. It wouldn't hold for long. Cole staggered forward, breathing hard but still moving, still fighting. The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, twisting and narrowing until it fed into the wider maze of the storm drains. Water trickled underfoot, and the walls were slick with algae and grime. They moved fast, every step echoing in the confined space like a gunshot. Behind them, distant shouts rang out, growing louder. Time was running out. Shadow stopped suddenly, his ears pricked, body rigid. Holt followed his gaze and saw, ahead in the gloom, the faint outline of a heavy steel hatch half buried under debris. Their way out. But as she sprinted forward, a voice crackled to life over a hidden radio in Cole's jacket. One she hadn't even realized he carried. A voice Holt recognized instantly. "Commander Sutton. Bring them alive if you can," Sutton said, calm as death itself. "The dead's acceptable too." The hatch loomed closer, salvation and damnation wrapped together. And somewhere behind them, the real hunt had just begun. The hatch loomed closer, the corroded steel edges barely visible under the sickly glow of Holt's dying flashlight. Water dripped from the concrete ceiling, each splash marking the rapid, dwindling time they had left. Behind them, the echo of bootsteps grew louder, sharper, fueled by bloodlust and orders. Holt gritted her teeth, shoving the hatch open with a screech of tortured metal. Cool desert air rushed in, dampened by the stench of rust and fear. Cole stumbled through first, his hands still bound, Shadow bounding after him, his body tense, every muscle taut like a drawn bowstring. Holt emerged last, pivoting on her heel to cover their retreat. They found themselves in the ruins of an old drainage yard, nothing but cracked asphalt and broken chain-link fencing stretching out into the night. Lights danced in the distance, more vehicles converging. They weren't safe yet, not by a damn mile. Holt yanked Cole behind a crumbling barrier, gun up, eyes scanning for the next move. Shadow crouched low beside her, nostrils flaring, ears pinned back. It happened too fast. A shape materialized out of the shadows. Commander Sutton, flanked by 2 other officers Holt recognized immediately, both dirty, both loyal to the wrong king. Sutton's face was a mask of cold arrogance, his service pistol hanging loosely in one hand, like he didn't even need to try anymore. "This is where it ends," Sutton said, his cuffs gleaming under the flickering security lights. "You're not hiding behind proxies anymore. Huh, Blake?" he called out, voice sharp with contempt. Sutton's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile if it hadn't been so devoid of warmth. "No need," he said. "You're already dead." The gun came up. The world slowed into shards of frozen light and sound. Holt saw the barrel flash, a bloom of fire in the night. She moved on instinct, but she wasn't fast enough. Neither was Cole. But Shadow was. The German Shepherd launched himself like a missile, his body slamming into Cole's side just as the bullet tore through the air. The shot hit Shadow square in the chest, the impact throwing him sideways into the cracked asphalt with a sickening thud. Time snapped back into full speed, roaring and brutal. "No!" Holt screamed, her voice ripping from her throat as she dropped to one knee, firing twice in quick succession. One of Sutton's men went down, clutching his leg, howling. Chaos exploded across the drainage yard. Cole staggered but stayed upright. Blood splattered across his shirt, not his, but Shadow's. Shadow shouted something into his radio, a sharp, desperate bark of rage. Holt fired again, forcing the second officer into cover. Cole dropped to his knees beside Shadow, hands fumbling at the dog's massive shoulders. Desperate, frantic. Shadow whimpered, trying to rise, but his legs wouldn't obey. "Stay with me, buddy," Cole muttered. Voice cracking, blood pooled under the dog's heaving body. Dark and too much. Holt covered them both, her magazine running dry too fast, the click of the slide locking back like a death knell, and then another noise. A soft beep. Cole frowned, reaching instinctively toward the thick collar around Shadow's neck. His fingers found a hard ridge he hadn't noticed before, hidden under the leather. A small embedded device, a camera. Tiny, almost a collar with embedded tracking, biometric sensors. Standard, they'd said. Necessary upgrades. But no one had mentioned a camera. He yanked it free, the small device blinking red, indicating active recording. And suddenly it all made sick, perfect sense. Shadow had been recording from the moment they entered the warehouse. Every conversation, every confession. Sutton's orders. Proof. Cold, irrefutable, damning. Holt saw it too, the realization flashing across her face like lightning. They had him, they had everything. Sutton seemed to understand it in the same instant. His eyes narrowed. "You think anyone's going to believe the words of a dirty ex-cop and a washed-up canine handler?" he snarled. Advancing slowly, gun raised again. Cole cradled Shadow's trembling body, his own blood boiling with rage and grief. "We don't have to say a damn thing," Holt said. Voice like iron. "You already did." Somewhere in the distance, sirens began to wail. Not Sutton's men this time. Real ones. Uncorrupted. Maybe. Sutton cursed, spinning toward the approaching sound, calculating, hunting for an escape. But Holt moved first. She surged forward, tackling Sutton to the ground, the gun clattering free across the broken concrete. They wrestled, fists in fury and betrayal colliding in a brutal knot. Cole struggled to his feet, blood smearing his hands, his mind roaring with one thought: Shadow needed help. Now. Shadow whimpered again, trying to crawl toward him, but his strength was fading fast. Cole tore off his jacket, pressing it hard against the wound, whispering broken promises into the dog's ear. "You're not done yet, buddy," he muttered fiercely. "You're not done." Behind him, Holt fought like a woman possessed, driving Sutton back, refusing to yield even an inch. The sirens grew louder, nearer, salvation and judgment thundering together through the night. But whether they'd make it that far was a question no one could answer yet. The chaos unraveled fast, the night spinning into a flurry of flashing lights and shouted commands as the sirens converged on the warehouse ruins. Armed officers poured into the drainage yard, weapons drawn, faces grim. But the first thing they saw was Holt standing over a bloodied and defeated Sutton, her cuffs snapping onto his wrists with a finality that echoed across the cracked asphalt. Cole knelt beside Shadow, refusing to let go. The jacket pressed against the dog's chest stained a deep, angry red. EMTs swarmed them next, pulling Holt back, treating Shadow with a frantic energy that spoke louder than words. Every second mattered. Cole let them work but refused to move more than a foot away, his hands bloodied, his face carved in stone. Someone tried to pull him aside, some captures being dropped. Palpathy began. Cole barely heard a word. His world had narrowed to the shallow, ragged breaths of the dog fighting for his life. It wasn't until much later, when the gunfire faded into memory and the night retreated before the rising blush of dawn, that the full weight of everything settled in. Commander Sutton was led away in chains, his empire exposed, dismantled by the very loyalty he had once tried to corrupt. The photographs, the accounts, the recordings from Shadow's hidden camera, proof undeniable. The media would have a feast. Politicians would bluster and posture. The department would pretend it had never known. But none of that mattered to Cole. Not anymore. He sat on the low stone wall outside the triage center, watching the horizon shift colors, a battered duffel bag at his feet. Holt joined him without a word. Her uniform stained, her knuckles split and bruised. For a long time they didn't speak, just breathed the same exhausted air. Two survivors sitting at the edge of a battlefield that no one else even understood. Finally, Holt said, voice rough, "He's gonna make it." Cole turned to her, a flicker of hope breaking through the armor around his heart. Holt nodded, her eyes softer than he had ever seen them. The vest took most of it, punctured a lung, but they're saying he's tough, stubborn. A bitter laugh escaped Cole's throat. Sounds about right? There was a long pause. Then Holt reached into her jacket and pulled out a small object, the collar camera now wiped clean and silent. She pressed it into Cole's palm without a word, a silent offering, a gesture of trust. Cole stared at it for a long moment, feeling the full weight of it in his hand, evidence. Justice, a symbol of everything that had gone wrong and everything that might still be set right. You could stay, Holt said after a while, almost hesitantly. Help rebuild, clear your name properly. Cole shook his head slowly, his gaze drifting toward the east where the first true light of morning was chasing away the last tattered scraps of night. I'm not built for that anymore, he said simply. I did what I had to do. Now it's time to go. Holt didn't argue. Maybe she understood better than anyone. An hour later, with Shadow sedated but stable in the back of a battered pickup lent by a sympathetic deputy, Cole tightened the last strap on the Harley. The same Harley he had almost died for. The same Harley that had nearly damned him. It felt fitting somehow that it would carry him out of this place, out of the ashes of betrayal and regret. Shadow lay curled up under a thick blanket, one eye cracked open, watching him with tired but trusting eyes. Cole stroked his head gently, murmuring nonsense under his breath, promises he wasn't sure he could keep but needed to say anyway. He slung the duffel onto the bike, adjusted the worn leather seat and kicked the engine to life. It rumbled under him, a living thing, eager to run. Behind him, Holt stood silently at the edge of the parking lot, arms crossed, face unreadable. She didn't call out, didn't wave. That wasn't their style. Cole pulled the helmet over his head, the visor clicking down with a final, decisive snap. He revved the engine once, feeling the vibrations through his bones, and then, without looking back, he rolled onto the deserted highway. The asphalt stretched ahead, cracked and endless and free. As he rode, Shadow's head lifted from the blanket, ears pricking at the familiar sound. The big shepherd pushed himself shakily upright, braced himself against the back of the bike with quiet dignity. Then, with a soft, deep-throated bark that cut through the morning mist like a promise, Shadow announced their departure to the sleeping world. No medals, no parades, no apologies, just two broken souls riding into the horizon, leaving behind a town that had betrayed them both. The bike roared louder, picking up speed, the wind tearing at Cole's jacket, tugging at the lingering ghosts that clung to his shoulders. Shadow barked again, stronger this time, the sound rolling across the empty fields like a challenge, a prayer, a declaration. Somewhere out there, beyond the cracked highways and the broken promises, a new life waited. And this time, they would choose their own fate. Together, always together, as the sun clawed its way above the distant hills, casting long golden fingers across the wasteland. The motorcycle disappeared into the rising light, a blur of chrome and defiance. And behind it, riding shotgun on the winds of a new beginning, a single voice rose deep, steady, unbreakable, the voice of a warrior who had never truly been a dog. A bark, a laugh, a promise. And then, silence. But somewhere far down the road, a new story was already beginning. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay with us for more journeys like this one. Which moment hit you the hardest? Was it Shadow's sacrifice, Cole's quiet departure, or something else? I'd love to hear where you're watching from and what part of this story stayed with you the most. Share it with us in the comments below. Your voice matters,